Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for being here. For those of you I've not met, my name is Kim O'Mara, and I'm really grateful to welcome you on behalf of Search for Common Ground. Today's conversation is going to kick off a new three-part series about how peace building can meet this moment when polarization runs deep, conflict feels ever present. We're focusing on how Search works across divides without taking sides to foster honest dialogue, build cooperation, and plant seeds of hope. So today we're beginning with a closer look at Israel and Palestine, a region where Search has been engaged for more than 20 years and where questions of identity and coexistence can feel especially urgent. You'll hear a perspective today that doesn't always make it to the headlines, one grounded in partnership and peace building and the real work of trying to build bridges in the middle of devastation. Our hope is in curating this space. It feels less like a webinar and more like a conversation, and we're excited to invite you into that. But first, I'd love to introduce you to today's panelists. So I'm honored to welcome Shamil Idriss, Search's CEO. Many of you know him well, but those of you who may be newer to the Search community, Shamil brings decades of experience leading peace-building efforts around the world, from conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa to the halls of the UN. He's served with Search in various roles over the past 16 years, more than a decade as CEO, and continues to shape our mission with clarity and, most importantly, heart. So, Shamil, so glad to have you with us today. Thanks.
Well,
And second, I'm thrilled to introduce Maya Savir, who recently joined Search as our country director in Israel. Maya brings deep experience in peace building and philanthropy, both in Israel and Africa, where she's led efforts to build partnerships across sectors and borders. So thank you again for joining us for this really important conversation. And I'll open it up with a few questions for our panel. And then for the final 20 minutes or so, we'll open it up to the group to ask some questions of your own. So as we go on through this first part, please feel free to drop questions in the chat at any point or raise your hand when we get to the Q&A if you'd like to ask something live. If you prefer to submit your questions privately, you can select Mallory Wyckoff in the chat drop-down menu and direct your question to her, and she'll make sure that it gets included. In any way, we'd really love to bring your voice into the conversation. So with that, Shamil, I'll start with you. We're having this conversation at a time when tensions around Israel and Palestine are incredibly high, it goes without saying, and even talking across differences feels fraught. And yet Search continues to show up in these spaces, not by choosing sides, but by working with people across divides. So for those of us like me who are newer to this approach, where does this work begin? And specifically, how does multi-partiality help us take those first steps in building trust and dialogue?
yeah, no, thank you very much, Kim. And a really profound thank you to everyone who's joined. It's great to see some very long-standing friends and supporters, as well as people completely new to us. And every one of you is welcome. I also just want to acknowledge, we most of the conversations we organize like this are difficult. Um, Fewer as difficult for people as this one. In the conversations we've been having with people for the last couple of years, I think the term trauma is thrown around a lot in today's world. And yet, on this conversation, in most of the venues where we've spoken with people, there are people who have gone through and are really going through now real trauma. They either directly know people whose lives have been devastated or even killed, or held hostage, or whatever it might be, or they're just living vicariously through real suffering, unable to put their phones down at night, scrolling through things that make them very depressed and despondent and isolated. And so I think, the political perspectives of the people who have joined us on this call are very diverse. Um, the people themselves are equally warmly welcomed and embraced, and I really appreciate you being here. I think to answer your question, Kim, I would just highlight a couple of things, and I think when Maya has a chance to share a bit from her perspective in Israel, you'll see the specifics of some of these things, reflected. Um, the first is just a starting point of how we view the world as being really profoundly interdependent and mutually vulnerable. Um, I think oftentimes, and in a lot of the one-on-one conversations I've had with some of the people here, I reflect back on the that ship that turned sideways in the Suez Canal. I think just a few years ago in 2021, it blocked the Suez Canal for I think 5 or 6 days, and grocery prices went up in Middle America and all around the world. And I use that example because it's not such a traumatic example, but it's just a reflection of just how precarious and how interconnected the world is today. And there's no going back from that. And in all of the conflicts where we work around the world, including this one, there is an assumption that we have that I don't think reflects a political position or an ideology or even a preference, just a blunt reality that people's safety and security is wrapped up in one another's safety and security. And increasingly in the world today, that's true for all of us. And that is, you can look at this as a very vulnerable and therefore scary world to live in. And from one perspective, it is. On the other hand, I think that gives us the greatest chance that we've ever had to actually figure out how to live with our differences and live with mutual respect. And so the starting point for us, I think, is that perspective on the inherent dignity of people and the mutual vulnerability that we have. I think practically the three things I would just highlight quickly in terms of our methodology. One is that we believe that the best way to transform relationships from adversarial, even warring relationships to collaborative, trusting relationships is through fostering collaboration. That connecting people and fostering dialogue between them is always necessary, but is never sufficient. And especially when communities are suffering, have suffered, or are suffering now, dialogue itself will become a dirty word for people if it doesn't lead to real change into things that are meaningful to them. And so everywhere, any team of ours that you would visit anywhere around the world, and those of you who have supported us for years know this, you would find our teams figuring out creative ways of fostering collaborative action across dividing lines. And in the most divisive conflicts in the world, that collaborative action in the early stages can oftentimes look almost irrelevant or symbolic. Soccer tournaments, art exhibits, jointly developed media programs, whatever it might be, just whatever can get people doing things together that they feel address shared concerns or mutual or fears or whatever it might be. So collaboration is central to everything that we do. And in a way, um, so I'll share. I think the second thing I would share is we understand the critical importance of building peace both top down and bottom up. Now, we've said that from the beginning of our organization's existence, and we really push back against the notion that it's all about leadership or it's all about the people. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's all about all of it. You need both leadership, you need both political will, and you need popular support. And one of the things that's happening everywhere in the world today is that there's never been a bigger gap between those who are in positions of formal authority and those who have influence. And you need to engage with both of them. You need to engage with the political leaders. They need to sign their peace agreements, their ceasefires, whatever it might be, their agreements. And you have to mobilize the popular support. If you're in Mali today and you foster a truce or an agreement across political divides, but you don't engage the young man who has 10,000 followers in the very district where Boko Haram is recruiting from, a young man who you might have thought irrelevant a few years ago, well, now that can destabilize everything. And again, just like the world of mutual vulnerability, that's scary because it means you really have to engage at multiple levels. But one of the ways in which I think our organization has been fairly unique is in that real commitment to building both that bottom up and top down support. And you'll hear a little bit about some of those sort of track two efforts that try to make some of those linkages. And then the third and the final piece was, and Maya is one part of this equation. No one person can be the whole part of this equation because the third part, which you already referenced, Kim, is this notion of multi-partial teams and multi-partial coalition. So what does that mean? That's very different from impartial. You know, our teams on the front lines are not third-party mediators or arbitrators. They don't come with a neutrality that connotes distance, and so neutrality can be very helpful. I would like my judge, if I ever go on trial, to be neutral. Um, but when you're building peace, in our experience, it's critically important that your team and your partners are not only local, but critically important, they reflect the dividing lines of that conflict. Their partiality is actually their strength when it's put in contact with one another. And so Maya's Palestinian, counterpart, Huda, is not on the call today because we wanted to have a conversation specifically about Israel and what's going on within Israel today. Um, uh, but the teams that are advancing our work around the world are always multi-partial. And that means that they bring unique convening power, credibility, collective wisdom, They're the ones that when they sit together can say, you know what, if you use that word, nobody in my community will listen to us. So can you not do that anymore? Or, if we can do something over here, that'll open up all the doors to the security forces, which is a really strategic place. Let's do that. That kind of collective wisdom. And I think I'll end with that is I think each of these pieces of fostering trust through collaborative action, of driving peace both bottom up and top down by engaging those with influence as well as those with authority, and by having a real commitment to multi-partial coalitions. All of that is a manifestation of maybe what's the most overused saying in social change, which is be the change you want to see in the world. It's very difficult to create a more just, inclusive, dignified, nonviolent world through a very adversarial, exclusivist, might makes right or win or lose activism. So I think those would be the main things that I would point out, Kim.
Thanks so much for that really wonderful introduction. I think all of those words you described about what makes up those teams, I've come to know in Maya in the short time we've met. So Maya, I'd love just to turn to you quickly just to share a little bit about your background and what led you to this work, what keeps you going, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what you're seeing on the ground. But please first share a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for being with us tonight. Actually, it's noon for you. Sorry. My name is Maya. I joined Search for Common Ground almost a year ago. A little bit about my background. I grew up in a family of peace activists and peace builders. My mother was a peace activist and a professional diplomat, and my father was a peace activist and a professional diplomat. He was also the chief negotiator of the Oslo Accords. So actually, I grew up in this atmosphere. I actually have a T-shirt, a peace T-shirt from when I was 4 years old, and my parents took me, on their shoulders. And I grew up with Palestinians all of my life. I began my career doing development work and humanitarian aid, working with malnourished individuals, specifically children, in various places in Africa. I worked in South Africa and Rwanda, Kenya, DRC, Uganda, Ethiopia. And in our community, in the peace building community in Israel, I've been active for many years as an activist and also as a writer. I joined Search for Common Ground because of, Shamil, what you mentioned at the end of your opening words about because of the multi-partiality. I'm sure you guys living in the States are feeling this as well. And I'm sure it's true for every conflict, but I think with this conflict now, it's become much, much more extreme. Everybody's expected to be either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to say anything, to engage in a conversation that is a little bit more complex about being for Palestine and for Israel, for human beings, for children, for equality, for dignity. And I think the essence of this is very, very important, and it's much needed in the peace camp in Israel. So and probably we will touch on that a little bit later. And also it has to do with the way we want to build peace and how we want to open the doors to new audiences, to broaden the basis of support for peace. And again, I think we'll touch on that a little bit later, but I think this is what brought me here. And I do want to say just a little bit something about our team. Shamil, you mentioned Huda. So Huda Abu Al-Qub is my counterpart in Palestine. She's the Palestine country director, and she works in Palestine and I work in Israel. And our team is both Israeli and Palestinian, and we work together. And even projects or any work that I do in Israel, because it's Israeli, or work that Huda does in Palestine, because that's what the reality demands, we still work together. Our strategy is aligned. We work together, we consult, and we're partners in the most profound sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. And it's just wonderful to have you here and to set that, I've been in rooms with you and Hooted together, and your presence is, it's just, it's wonderful to see and to model. And Maya, as an American Jew myself and someone who worked in the Israeli trauma space for a decade previous to this work, I have to share that watching this war unfold has been incredibly painful, deeply complicated, both in witnessing the devastation and in feeling the growing division within and across communities I am part of and I deeply care about. And like so many, we're taking in much of this through the news and social media, which feels nonstop and overwhelming a lot of the time. From where you sit and talking about how, your priorities are so aligned, and that's the circles that you're sitting in to do this work. But outside of that, can you give us a sense of what's happening inside Israeli society right now? How are people responding to the war, to government, and to one another?
One another is the most difficult thing, I think, but I'll get back to that. I think there's a heaviness, sadness, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. I realize, and I think it's understandable, that the attention is, the world's attention is on Gaza, and rightfully so. But the situation in Israel is, and also, first of all, on the West Bank, it's also very, very bad, increasingly. But in Israel, it's very bad. The war has been going on for a long time. October 7th, I think I cannot overstate how traumatic it was, and how fracturing it was to the sense of security that Israelis had. And this feeling is prevalent everywhere. The hostage situation that is ongoing, it's a very specific type of torture, I think. And the war with Iran was devastating. It was dangerous. It was scary. There's a lot of destruction. And the envelope, put this in the envelope of an ongoing societal and political crisis. Just gives you some of the flavor. Many Israelis have been in the streets for almost 5 years, at least once a week. More frequently, it's 2 or 3 times a week. And it's felt everywhere. Regarding the war, between 70 to 80% of Israelis from all political persuasions are saying very consistently for many months that they would like to see this war end. All research is showing this. And the government is continuing this war, which means not only that the suffering continues, if you look at it politically, what it means is that there is a great rift between the government and the people. The mistrust is enormous, and which just adds to the feeling of helplessness, because after being for so long in the streets trying to make a difference, and this difference is not happening, I think it creates an atmosphere and a deep feeling of helplessness. Having said all that, I do want to say that I think we're in some kind of transition period. There's some sense of anticipation, because everybody, and again, this I'm saying regardless of people's political view, it's quite clear that this situation is not sustainable. Politically, military-wise, it's not sustainable. Where it's going, it's too early to say. But I think everybody knows that the next couple of months are going to be dramatic. Before we touch on maybe later on the peace camp, I do want to say something about a very big difference that I'm seeing before October 7th and after. I think before October 7th, the majority of Israelis considered the Israeli-Palestinian conflict distant and controllable. That's the truth. The majority of Israelis didn't suffer on a daily basis from the conflict. And it was sort of like a a big pushback, and that's gone. And although many Israelis are entertaining fantasies about how we're going to solve this, that are not realistic and also very saddening, still, I think there is something for us to work with, because the conflict is here and everybody is seeing it. It's very, very difficult to speak to a person about what is beyond their blind spot. It's almost impossible, right? Because they're not seeing it. Now it's here and everybody's seeing it. And this is something that we can work with. This is a handle.
Thanks, Maya. I give you so much credit for being able to speak to that so clearly. I think it speaks a lot to just the resilience and humanity that often gets lost in the headlines. So as we were prepping for this conversation, Shamil, you raised a question that I think really speaks to the heart of how people are thinking about solutions and how we get to people starting to think about solutions. So Shamil, would you mind sharing a little bit on that and then sharing your question with Maya?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of directly, Maya, off of where you just ended that, because I do recall right around the time when you joined us when I was in Israel last, and I met with a number of people, and I remember uh, the former foreign minister Zipi Livni saying to me, she said, "You need to understand that this conflict has not been part of the last five national election debates." And then she leaned in and she said, "Let me explain what I mean. It's not that the party that raised it lost. It's that it wasn't a debate." And that's been different over these last 20 years or so. This was her case to me, than before that, when people like your father and others, the work that they were doing, whether people supported it or not, it was a topic of dinner table conversation all over Israel, right? Like, is this the right thing to do or not? And so what she then said is that you can't imagine, she was saying to me, how the events of October 7th threw this issue back into the national consciousness in the most traumatic way possible. And people are still reeling and on their back heels from that after essentially putting it out of mind for the most part. So it's sort of similar in some ways to what you were just sharing. And I guess a question that I had for you, which Kim is alluding to, was really, and when Kim asked me to open up, I started with this about kind of how we view conflicts everywhere that we work, which is, it's one thing if you believe, if you accept, even if you can't figure out how you're going to get there, if you accept even begrudgingly, look, Israel cannot be secure if Palestinians are not secure. Israelis cannot enjoy the fullness of their political rights and safety and all of that if Palestinians are not as well. That would be one thing, that notion that among the most extreme voices in every conflict that we see, there are those who say, no, 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 you don't have to accommodate anything. Like we can just destroy the other side, and you see that everywhere that we work, there are some voices like that. And in some places, those voices are in government or in positions of real authority. So I guess I'm curious, how you see it in Israel now, now that, as you're saying, the conflict is unavoidable. It's, in this very traumatic way, it's in front of everybody. Is there any space, let alone momentum, towards that view? Even if people are saying, I don't know how to get there or what that will look like, but we've got to figure it out? Or is that not there yet?
Well, it's not there enough, obviously, but maybe I'll share something that I do find interesting. Social psychology research shows that all over the world, that during conflict, it's very normal for feelings to be very heated, for there to be very high degrees of hatred, longing for revenge, racism. And this is what we're seeing here. Trust is not, it's not that it's low, it's non-existent. On the other hand, we also know that usually takes between 3 to 5 years from the end of of war for there to be a process of maturation during which a society says, okay, military force will not give us what we want. There's no security there. We also need a diplomatic process. And what's interesting is that we're seeing, again, very consistently in Israel, both at the same time. We don't have this gap of 3 to 5 years. So we're seeing horrible feelings of hatred, mistrust, pessimism, really deep-rooted pessimism, and on the other hand, an understanding that some diplomatic solution is needed. That's something to work with. Also, I would like to say something about what you spoke of interdependence, Shamil, and I think it's a very, very strong point because extremists in Israel and in Palestine will not accept this, right? They entertain these fantasies of the other side just disappearing, whether by themselves or with, help. And I think this is key. And it's key to understanding that it's like when you live in a building, right? If you do not acknowledge that you have a neighbor, then there are so many things that are just going to go wrong. And if your neighbor throws garbage in the staircase and you do not acknowledge that you have a neighbor, then you're not going to be able to start communicating with this person to solve the problem. So the extremists on both sides are not entertaining this understanding, and we really have to work at that. And you also mentioned dirty words such as dialogue. And for so long, peace has become a dirty word, truly. In the last 2 decades, until 20 years ago, Israelis' self-perception was of a society that wants peace, but we just have to find a partner, or maybe the partner is ready, not ready. That's gone, and that's part of what we need to do to reintroduce the word. And we are doing this, and maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. Really speaking about peace, and really speaking of peace as a basic human right. We speak about our children, that they deserve shelter and health, vaccines, right? And food and love and education. And we need to reintroduce the fact that peace is a basic human right, and that is it's our duty to bring it to them.
So Maya, I'd love to speak from there because one of the ways in which we're doing that is our participation in the It's Time Coalition. And something you said that really stuck with me when we first spoke was that trust, like you just said, might be non-existent, and empathy is at a low point, but it's not lost. And that feels like such an important reminder, and when it can be hard to hold on to hope. So with that in mind, I'd love if you would introduce this short clip that we're going to show how, and tell us more about, like I said, the It's Time Coalition and how this kind of work is helping to keep that empathy alive, to promote ideas that peace is a basic human right, and how we can use this to move forward.
Thank you, Kim. So a couple of months into the war, we got together a few women. I'm stressing women, in an office in Tel Aviv. It was winter, it was dark. We were really distraught. I don't know how many of you know just how small this society is. So everyone knows really firsthand people who were killed, raped, kidnapped. And we said, we have to do something. And we just began a conversation, and within really a few weeks, we began a coalition that's called It's Time, right? It's Time for Peace. And it now unites over 60 peace organizations in Israel. Some of them are cross-border, just like us. So at Search, we're a cross-border organization, so there are a few more organizations like this. There are a few organizations that are shared society in Israel, Jews and Arabs. All of them agreed on the basics. A need for an immediate ceasefire, end of occupation, and peace that would be based on equality and agreed upon between both sides. We have quite a few, we have a lot of work on our hands, but one of the things that we know we really have to do is to address one of the shackles of I guess, any conflict, but certainly ours. And that is that the majority of Israelis are sure that Palestinians do not want peace. And it's the same for Palestinians. They're sure that Israelis don't want peace. And we need to amplify voices that want peace. And being a cross-border organization, we are really in a unique position to do that, to amplify these voices. So in May, we got together for a peace summit in Jerusalem, a 2-day peace summit. And before that, I connected with a colleague of mine. Her name is Makbula Nasser. She's a Palestinian journalist. And she made the connection to Iman, who is a mother and a doctor living and working in Gaza City. And she really wanted to reach out to Israelis to send a message of peace. So we'll see that now.
Great. And I'll just make a note for those of you viewing, please make sure to move your cursor away just from the Zoom screen so the toolbar doesn't cover the subtitles.
مرحبا، أنا اسمي إيمان سعيد. أنا طبيبة وأنا كمان عندي بنتين وولدين وأنا في غزة. يوم 7 أكتوبر حدثت صدمة وكارثة وتفاجئنا جميعا باللي صار. تغيرت كل حياتي وتغيرت حياة عيلتي وكل شي تغير في غزة. صرنا عايشين في كابوس اسمه الحرب. الحرب أبشع وأسوأ تجربة ممكن يمر فيها الإنسان. قصف، دمار، موت، صواريخ. آلاف الأطفال بيموتوا وبيحترقوا. آلاف من الأبرياء راحوا ضحايا. في الحرب عايشين أصعب ظروف ممكن يعيشها الإنسان. نحن عايشين مأساة حقيقية. إحنا في هاي الحرب من 17 شهر. أنا مثل ناس كتير هين فقدت بيتي، سيارتي احترقت، عيادتي أيضا اتضررت وصارت لا تصلح لخدمة المرضى. روتين الحياة ثقيل ومرهق جدا. أنا بضطر أمشي مسافات طويلة لأوصل للمكان المطلوب. صعوبة في توفير المي للبيت، صعوبة في توفير الطعام، والأغلبية من الناس هون بتعاني من سوء تغذية وأنيميا لأنه لا يوجد إلا المعلبات في السوق. تخيلوا نحن في القرن العشرين بنولع نار مثل العصر الحجري وإنسان الكهف. غزة مدينة مدمرة، حي الرمال اللي بعيش فيه.
Thanks. And I'm sorry we won't be able to show the whole video today, but we'll make sure to send it out after. But as you'll see when you keep watching, Dr. Iman goes on to share what her life like, and you'll see the English, the Hebrew, the Arabic subtitles there. And in the end, she talks about her hope for peace and that is the message. And this idea that it's being shared from this coalition that we're so deeply a part of, I hope you'll understand why this coalition and Search's role in it feels so vital in this moment. So before we open for questions, Shamil, I just want to turn it back to you. Looking ahead, what does meaningful progress look like from here? And what's Search's priorities in this moment?
So the media space is a very important one for us, getting narratives like this out for the reason that Maya shared. One of the things that's necessary to understand is that people in these contexts, it's always the most extreme voices are the loudest, and other people get sort of cowed. And even if they don't quite agree or they want a different future, they don't feel that they can speak up or and the act of amplifying those voices really doesn't only have an impact on itself, but it gives license and encouragement to others. And so one of the ways that our team is working very hard is to amplify those voices through social media and other platforms so that people can see that there is a desire, even as basic as a desire on the other side for a different future and one that doesn't annihilate the other side. I would say that the most important priority for us right now is actually to maintain that multi-partial team. This is everything. You can't, there's a saying in the humanitarian sector that you don't exchange business cards in a hurricane. And the idea is, you don't wait for things to go horrible to try to build the relationships that are needed to help one another. And there is no way that we would be able to create a multi-partial team now or over the last 2 years if we didn't have one in place before this war began, and a track record through all the ups and downs of this conflict over decades of being absolutely committed to a robust Israeli and Palestinian presence that doesn't just represent one camp within each of those societies, but that is truly, engaged and connected with those who have real constituency. Our ability to maintain that is at risk. It's at risk in part because of the U.S. foreign aid collapse earlier this year, where we lost this team specifically lost significant funding that was just cut overnight, not because of anything specific they were doing, just because it was across the board, devastation. Um, but that our other supporters, different European governments and others, paused as a result of a lot of that to figure out what they would do. And so there's just been a gap. We have been invited to submit proposals for funding for our work in both Israel and Palestine and across borders. And that funding, we hope, will come through towards the end of the year. And it would allow us to do a lot more of the work that Maya just gave a quick snippet of here. But even just to get through there, we need to keep the team on the ground. And frankly, I want to free Maya, Huda, I want to free people up, our leadership up from having to fundraise for their own jobs tomorrow or wondering if they're going to be around here in another 3 months to secure that leadership's place. If you have those kinds of leaders in place, they can bring along with them and build out teams. They can secure the kind of support. And so we are looking right now, we're trying to mobilize $350,000 to maintain our multi-partial leadership team in Israel and Palestine, while we have pending proposals out for well over 5 or 6 times that amount that we anticipate are likely to come through early at the end of this year or early next year. So that's critically important for us. The other piece is connecting that grassroots work with influence on decision makers. And it's not for nothing that Maya emphasized the importance of working with women leaders. This is one area where both in Palestinian society and in Israeli society, there's a great deal of frustration about the degree to which women have been excluded from decision making, particularly around peace processes. One of the things that's best known in conflict settings everywhere in the world is that when women are included, you have a higher likelihood of peace agreements, not only manifesting, but actually lasting longer. And so this desire to mobilize women's voices and women's leadership is not just a cross-border desire, but it's also a desire to really influence the leadership both in Israel itself and inside Palestine itself. And that's vitally important. So I would put the emphasis on the women's leadership, media, and the capacity to do cross-border work, which is entirely dependent on having a multi-partial leadership team in place.
Wonderful. Some big goals and a wonderful team in place that we want to just continue supporting. So I know there's a few questions that have come through in the chat, but we'd love to open it up here. And we know that these conversations stir even bigger questions, and that's why we're here. So we'd love to hear from you all. And if anybody would like to jump in to speak out and ask a question now, I see, is it Jer has a hand raised?
Gare, and then there was also,
Yeah.
I see a question in the chat from Susie and others. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Gare.
Yeah. So hi. So thank you, Maya. I have two questions for you. So one is, Shamil mentioned that those who scream loudest are the most extreme. And if you look at the press coverage, so the press is in principle sensational. So they want to emphasize the most extreme to maximize conflict and sell the news. So that is typically what we see, at least in the international press. You mentioned that 70 to 80% of the people in Israel want the war to end. I haven't seen that, although I read a lot. So my first question is, in the local press in Israel, is this understood? Do you get this message across? Is it discussed, or is it kind of suppressed, this type of opinions for the more moderate line? And secondly, are the leaders who are more moderate, are they do they feel free to speak out? I know Israel is a free democracy, but do they feel that they can express strongly what they mean, the politicians?
Thank you. Regarding local press, you're right. It goes to the sensational much more easily. The stats regarding the support in ending the war are in the papers, on television. They are everywhere, not by one research institution, by all of them. I would like to add that the majority of Israelis, when they say that they want to stop the war, they are not at all speaking about Palestinian suffering. This is something that is just now in the last weeks beginning to change. But until now, what we are seeing is a discussion on Israelis saying we can't take it anymore. This war is not going anywhere. It's not going to solve the problem being Hamas. And we want this to stop. So to answer your question, yes, it is in the press, and it just makes worse the feeling that the government is really turning a deaf ear to what the public wants. Regarding the leaders, there is a major political void in the center and on the left. There is no real alternative now. There are people, they mean well, but they don't come across in the Israeli mainstream as really people who can give Netanyahu a fight. Are they free to speak? Yes, they're free to speak. They will not be arrested, but what we call here in Israel the poison machine, which is a term that everybody on the left and on the right is using to describe the circle around Netanyahu, and what they do to anyone who criticizes him is very, very effective. And people who just, speak up find themselves accused of being traitors, and sometimes of they're accused of things they did not do. So it's quite difficult to speak up. Hopefully more people will be able to do that.
And maybe I can address a bit of Susie's question, then Maya, I think your perspective from inside Israel on her question would be really interesting and relevant. Because I see Susie's asked, would recognition of Palestine in the UK escalate the war by antagonizing Israel? What then? Since we organized this session just in the last week, we've seen a real, political moves, the UK, France, Canada, indicating their intention to recognize the state of Palestine under different conditions, but all three of those states saying that. We also saw the Arab League issuing a statement calling for Hamas to relinquish rule, turn over its weapons with international support, and turn over governance and security to the Palestinian Authority. So these things were clearly coordinated political efforts to indicate a clear and growing consensus in the Arab and Muslim world on the one hand, and in key Western countries on the other hand, of trying to put pressure on the leadership, both inside Gaza and in Israel, to shift course. I'm very curious, Maya, how this lands inside Israel. I have to imagine that a society where people are really consumed with this feeling of being isolated and being under threat, that this just adds in many ways to that feeling. And at the same time, without pressure on the political leadership, both in Gaza and in Israel, it's hard to imagine this disastrous course changing. And so I'd be interested to hear your kind of perspective. I think my sense is that if we cannot sufficiently demonstrate across these communities that there is safety on the other side of this, that there is a future, a safe future, a dignified future on the other side of this, And one of the ways you do that is by amplifying the narratives of both Palestinians and Israelis who want that future and don't see their best future as the annihilation of the other. That's one contribution, to try and encourage that whatever's happening at the political level actually is fostering some popular support and movement building. But Maya, how is this playing out? How is this news playing out inside Israel?
I think many people are taking this like a domino, one following one after the other, sort of like a defeat. And of course, this has to do with the government rhetoric. Yes, the dynamic you're describing is very accurate. Most Israelis are seeing this as something that is against Israel and not for Palestine. The answer to this would have to be on the international community to keep saying, we recognize Israel, we recognize Israel's needs for security. I realize this is being said again and again, but the trauma on the Israeli side is so raw that it's like an insatiable thirst. You cannot overstate this. So this needs to be said again and again. This is not against Israel. This is for Palestine. Israel's security will be maintained only through the security of your neighbors. Again, speaking about interdependency. Something that I find that is also very useful when I speak to people is about empathy. Kim, you asked about that before. And again, I find myself explaining that empathy has a particular characteristic that is, if you curtail it somewhere, then it just bounces back. You cannot take, just be unempathetic to one side and then maintain your empathy for yourself. And I think, by the way, what we're seeing with this government and its attitude towards the Israeli hostages is exactly that. And this is something that we're seeing again and again. And I think this is the kind of dialogue that I am able to maintain with people. I do want to say that we are, we mentioned us being multi-partial. This is true also in Israel. And we really, really make a point of maintaining our work with all communities in Israel. And this is not always easy. But if we want to make peace, if we want to build peace, we have to broaden the basis of support, and we have to introduce, we have to, let me just deviate for a moment. I mentioned earlier that I worked in Africa for years, and I really saw firsthand the meaning of the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. So, and for us, the child is peace, and we need as many parents as possible raising this child, because people who are not involved, who are not included, are not going to be supportive. We want them a part of it, and we want peace to have all of the characteristics of all of the cultures that are involved. So this is something that we really, really work on.
Thanks, Maya. We have just a time for a couple more quick questions. One I'll take from the chat. If there's anybody else that would like to ask one live, please feel free to raise your hand. One question that came through, which I think talks more about Search's approach, is after you get the parties of a conflict to talk, how do you convince the parties to listen to each other and focus on needs instead of desires, which are never satisfied?
So if you look at contexts around the world where negotiations have been held across warring parties, like as has been said in this very context, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And the interesting thing about this concept of multi-partiality that we apply at the steady peace building level from the bottom up to the top down is that's also the key to every successful negotiated peace agreement. The other party's constituency among their own community is what you actually depend on. Otherwise, they can't deliver peace. So you don't want to sign an agreement with some party that actually cannot bring their community along with them. And so in sort of like a paradoxical way, but in a very practical way, one key development is either an exhaustion with the pathway forward that realizes, whatever the goals of this were, either they have been attained or they're not attainable. And in this context, what we seem to be seeing increasingly, to the extent that there's any bubbling up, is that there is not a compelling and sustainable answer to the question of what does victory look like to this current pathway. There are answers to that, and Maya can speak to this, that would leave Israel in the position of essentially being a pariah state. And I think one of the things, I talked about the ship turning sideways in the Suez Canal, and one of my biggest fears right now is that security in today's world is not just a question of whether a foreign army is going to invade your country or not. We are living at a time when the means of hurting each other, even doing it at a large scale, are very widely distributed. A teenager can fly a drone. Anybody with a car can drive it into a crowd. People can hijack a plane and fly it into a building. I mean, the number of ways, I don't mean to do this in a fear-mongering way. We've seen this, and the world is not moving back from that level of real mutual vulnerability. And so whether for Israel or any other state, being able to assure the security of your citizens inside your borders isn't even sufficient if they feel insecure everywhere else they go. And so we have to get to a place where maybe it's that realization and that builds some momentum behind, is there a peace to be made with a party that can actually deliver real constituency among Palestinians, and therefore lead to a more truly secure future for Israel and Israelis as a whole. But I don't know, Maya, if you would answer that differently, please. And there's a question, Nikki, around how do you see the likelihood of any political leadership shifts in Israel? Is there any likelihood of that?
Yes, there is. First of all, if history teaches us anything, is that it is it's full of surprises. The last decade of apartheid South Africa was the bloodiest. There was no solution in sight. In Northern Ireland, the two sides negotiated again and again and again and failed each time until they succeeded. And we will succeed. There's no doubt in my mind. I also want to remind us that it is in the nature of wars to end. All wars end. And we need to make sure that this war ends and that we are not stopping at that, not just a ceasefire. We have to make the future a different future. I have kids. I raised them here. And there are people who are, sitting on the sidelines, the political sidelines, waiting to get in. As I said earlier, the next couple of months are going to be very, very telling. I think what we all need here is support. First of all, we need moral support. I know that for the majority of Israelis, Shama, you mentioned that Israel is becoming a pariah state, which is true. And I think what I would love for people, for friends abroad, is to be able to make the distinction between Israelis and their government at the moment, because this government is really a minority government. And I would also like to say to friends of Israel and friends of Palestine in the world, if you want to help us, support peace. Support peace builders. We are the ones who are going to make a difference. Yes, international pressure is needed. I agree, but it's not enough. We need to work from the ground. I do want to add something about the work. The atmosphere and the discourse is very, very dark. And a few months into the war, a friend of mine who's from the south of Israel, was hit very, very bad, contacted me, and she said, everyone around me has lost hope. Everyone is saying that there will never be peace. And I know that they are wrong, but I don't have the words. I don't know how to explain this. Can you help me? And I think this is also part of our job. We need to help people put into words their intuition, because the majority of people are moderates. They want a normal life. They don't want war. They don't want their kids to go to war, but we need to help them conceptualize this. And this is for the general public and also for specific groups. For instance, one of the women in our track 2 group, which we know we didn't have time to get into this, but it's diverse. It's interesting because it's diverse. And this is a religious woman. And she said at one point, the things we're discussing here, I can't share with my family over Shabbat dinner, because not because they won't agree with me. It's because it's not even a terminology that they can respond to. So part of what we need to do is come up with terminology that is palatable to people from various communities. And this is all work we're doing on the ground. We're doing it every day, and we will not give up.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you, Shamil. I think what a beautiful note to end. I want to wrap up on that note as a way, an important plug and a beautiful way to support peace in this moment and support Search right now is our Love Anyway shop. And as a small thank you for everyone on this call today, we'd love to offer 20% to anybody on next purchase. If you haven't checked it out before, it's full of beautiful artisan made items that support individuals and communities affected by conflict across the globe. So the link's in the chat, take a peek, find something that speaks to you, and use code SEARCH at checkout, which will get you that 20%. So really, thank you all so much for spending the time with us today. I think you both beautifully named it so well, that this work is only possible when people come together around a shared belief that peace is not only worth pursuing, but how we pursue it matters. And as someone still new and stepping into this role, I'm learning alongside all of you. And I just want to say how much I value this conversation and being in dialogue with all of you. This community building piece to me is so vital to this work. And I'm really committed to keeping this conversation going and growing. So with that, we'll put on the next slide here. There's 2 more sessions that we're putting in this series, and we'll send reminders out through email as well. The first on September 3rd, we'll be talking about the role of media, both in creating that polarization, but also in the work that Search is doing and how we utilize that. And that'll be with with Najla, our Director of Middle East and North Africa. And then October 8th, we'll look at the rise of hate and polarization with Neelan Parker, our Common Ground USA Director. So in the meantime, thank you. Please don't be a stranger. I'd love to connect personally with all of you on this call, think together about what you heard today from Shamil, from Maya, to hear your ideas and see how we can amplify these voices of peace. So thanks again. We'll see you soon. Really appreciate being here.